It was a perfect Saturday afternoon. The sun hung high in the sky, casting its warm glow over the suburban neighborhood. The streets were quiet, with only the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze and the distant hum of lawnmowers breaking the peaceful silence. Maya Thompson and her daughter, Lily, walked along the sidewalk, enjoying the rare tranquility. Lily carried her camera, the one thing that always seemed to put a smile on her face. She loved capturing the world around her, finding beauty in even the smallest things. "Mom, look at that garden," Lily exclaimed, pointing her camera toward a house with a well-kept yard. The colorful flowers and perfectly manicured shrubs caught her eye, begging to be photographed. "I have to get a picture of this." Maya glanced over and smiled. "It is beautiful, isn't it? But remember, no trespassing." Lily nodded absent-mindedly as she stepped closer to the curb, positioning herself for the perfect shot. She wasn't thinking about boundaries or private property, she was simply focused on capturing the vibrant flowers, the sunlight dancing off their petals. She took a deep breath, the scent of the flowers filling her lungs, and clicked the shutter. She lowered her camera, satisfied with the shot, and turned back to Maya. "This one's going to be amazing." Maya gave her a warm smile, her eyes soft with affection. "All right, let's head home. I'm sure you've got plenty of beautiful pictures to go through." Lily slung the camera around her neck and walked beside her mother, unaware of the looming storm that would soon shatter their peaceful day. As Maya and Lily walked further down the street, the sound of a door slamming open rang through the air. Maya's steps faltered, her eyes snapping toward the source of the noise. A woman in her mid-50s, dressed in a floral housecoat and flip-flops, stormed out of the house they had just passed. "Hey! You! What do you think you're doing?" the woman yelled, her voice sharp and accusatory. Maya turned around, her eyes narrowing as she saw the woman pointing directly at Lily, who had instinctively stopped in her tracks. The woman's angry gaze was fixed on her daughter, her lips curling into a snarl. Lily stood frozen, confused. What's the problem?" she asked, her voice small and hesitant. "This is my property." The woman's tone was venomous, and she stepped toward them, her eyes flickering from Lily's camera to Maya's face. "You can't just go around taking pictures of other people's yards. That's trespassing, that's intrusion." Maya's heart sank. She could feel the tension in the air, the sudden shift from peace to hostility. "Ma'am, we didn't mean any harm. Lily just saw the flowers, and," the woman cut her off, her voice rising. "I don't care what you meant. You don't have permission to photograph my property." She pointed to the ground as if marking an invisible boundary. "This is private property, and you crossed the line." Maya took a step forward, trying to keep the situation from escalating. "We're sorry if we upset you. We didn't mean to intrude." But the woman was undeterred, her face red with anger. "I don't care about your excuses. I should have called the cops the moment you started poking around." Lily, still holding her camera, looked up at her mother, her confusion turning into worry. Maya instinctively put a hand on her daughter's shoulder, trying to calm her, though her own heart was beginning to race. The confrontation escalated with every passing second, the woman's anger building. Maya could feel the air thickening with hostility, her mind racing for a way to de-escalate the situation. "Ma'am, please," Maya said, her voice calm but firm. "We didn't mean any disrespect. We'll leave, I promise. We're just passing through." The woman didn't seem to hear her. "You don't get it, do you?" she sneered. "This is my yard, my property, and you're not allowed to take pictures of it, not without my permission." She looked at Lily, her eyes sharp and full of disdain. "You people think you can just take whatever you want, don't you?" Lily shifted uneasily on her feet, her camera now hanging loosely around her neck. She opened her mouth to apologize, but before she could speak, the woman's voice rang out again, louder and more threatening. "I said get off my property," the woman screamed, her hand moving towards her side. Maya's stomach dropped as she saw the woman's fingers curl around the handle of something metal. At first, Maya thought it was a tool or maybe a cane, but then the unmistakable gleam of a gun caught the sunlight. Before Maya could react, before she could even think, the woman raised the gun, her eyes wide with fury. "You've gone too far," she shouted. "Maya, no!" Lily cried, her eyes wide with shock. But it was too late. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the quiet street, sharp and jarring. Maya barely registered the noise as she instinctively shoved Lily behind her, shielding her with her body. Time seemed to slow, everything happening at once yet in a blur. She could feel the heat of the gunshot, hear the deafening sound of it ringing in her ears. And then, the pain. The bullet struck Maya's shoulder, a searing pain that made her stagger back. She gasped, her hand clutching her wound as her knees buckled beneath her. Her vision blurred, and for a moment, the world seemed to spin. She felt the weight of her body shifting, the heat of the blood spreading down her arm, but she couldn't move. Her mind was frozen in shock. Lily screamed. "Mom! Mom!" Her voice was frantic, her hands shaking as she tried to help, but Maya was already sinking to the ground, her body weak and trembling. The woman, still standing on her property, seemed to snap back to reality, her expression changing from rage to confusion. Her hands shook as she lowered the gun, realizing what she had just done. Maya could feel herself slipping, the world fading at the edges, but she couldn't focus on the pain. Her eyes remained fixed on Lily, who was still crying out for her, calling her name as she tried to stop the bleeding. And then, somewhere in the distance, sirens began to wail. The world around Maya seemed to dissolve in a haze of blood and confusion. Her body burned with pain as the bullet wound in her shoulder throbbed, and her legs wobbled beneath her. She felt lightheaded, her vision blurring at the edges. She tried to focus, but the overwhelming pain was a force she couldn't escape. Her hand pressed desperately against her wound, but the blood seeped through her fingers, staining the sleeve of her shirt. The harsh heat of the sun on her back, the dust swirling around them, and the sound of Lily's frantic cries all felt far away, like a dream. Maya could hear her daughter, but her voice seemed to echo from a distance, warped by the weight of the situation. "Mom, please. You have to stay awake." Lily sobbed, her small hands shaking as she gently gripped Maya's arm. Her voice broke Maya's trance, but the fear in it only made her heart ache deeper. Maya could see the terror in her daughter's eyes, and it made her fight against the dizziness that clouded her mind. I'm here, sweetheart," Maya whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible, but she needed Lily to hear her. She needed to reassure her. "Don't worry, we'll get help. It'll be all right." The words felt hollow even to her. Maya knew that they weren't all right. Not by a long shot. With her free hand, she fumbled for her phone in her pocket, trying to dial 911, but her fingers felt numb, and the screen seemed to blur under her touch. She was too weak, too disoriented to keep her hands steady. A sharp pain shot through her chest as she breathed in deeply, and she realized she might not make it. Not like this. "Mom." Lily's voice trembled, bringing Maya back to the present. "Please, don't leave me. I can't lose you, too." Maya's heart twisted. She could see how scared Lily was, how much she needed her. She had to survive. She had to find a way to get help before it was too late. "Help is on the way, baby," Maya gasped, trying to force the words out despite the sharp pain in her chest. But the world around her was closing in, and she felt herself slipping. The thought of leaving Lily in the midst of this terror made her stomach churn. She could feel the darkness creeping closer, threatening to swallow her whole, but she refused to give in. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Stay with me, Lily. Don't leave me." Lily's cries were nearly frantic as she knelt by her mother, her hands trembling as she tried to keep pressure on the wound. But the blood just kept flowing, soaking Maya's shirt and staining her hands. Lily felt helpless, her tears mingling with the dirt on her cheeks. She wanted to scream, to do anything to make it better, but her mother's condition was overwhelming her every thought. Maya. Mom, please stay with me, Lily whimpered, her voice breaking. She wasn't sure how much time had passed, but it felt like hours. Her legs were numb from kneeling so long, and she could hardly keep her eyes open. Her thoughts were scattered, and her heart raced in fear. Through the haze of her panic, Lily heard a door slam open from across the street. She didn't look up, she couldn't afford to take her eyes off her mother. But then, a voice called out. It was a woman, elderly but strong. My God, what happened? Evelyn Carter, their neighbor, was rushing toward them, her wide eyes filled with concern. She had been inside her house, but the sound of gunfire had been impossible to ignore. She had rushed out the moment she saw the scene unfolding in front of her. Lily. What happened? Who did this? Evelyn knelt beside them, her hands hovering uncertainly over Maya. She didn't know what to do, but her years of watching neighbors and friends suffer in the harsh realities of life told her that something needed to be done immediately. Barbara. She shot her. Lily cried, barely able to get the words out. She shot Mom, and I don't know what to do. Evelyn's face hardened, her eyes flashing with recognition of who had caused this tragedy. That woman, she muttered to herself. She turned to Lily, her tone softening. I'm going to get help. Stay with your mom, all right? Lily nodded quickly, her eyes never leaving her mother. Evelyn scrambled to her feet and dashed for the door of her house. She was an old woman, but she knew what needed to be done. She didn't trust the local authorities to act fast enough, but she'd make sure someone came to help. As Evelyn entered the house, her phone was already out, dialing 911. The distant sound of sirens pierced through the stillness, growing louder with each passing second. Maya could hear them, but they felt like an echo, as though they were miles away. Her vision was growing dim, and her mind was clouded, but the knowledge that help was coming kept her fighting to stay awake. Maya, Lily whispered, her hands still shaking as she pressed them against her mother's wound. Mom, please, don't leave me. The sirens continued, louder now, closer. The sound filled Maya's ears as the darkness began to recede. She could feel the soft pressure of Lily's hands, the touch of her daughter grounding her. It was enough to push the fog of pain and fear away, if only for a moment. Then, the police car screeched to a halt in front of the house, and the doors flung open. Maya's heart skipped a beat at the sight of Officer Mark Daniels, his calm and collected demeanor a beacon of hope in the midst of the chaos. Stay with her. Officer Daniels barked to Lily as he approached. His tone was firm, but he softened when he saw how distraught the young girl was. We'll take it from here. Maya, barely conscious, could hear him as he knelt beside her, his hands expertly applying pressure to her wound. Ma'am, we've got paramedics on the way. Stay with me. Just stay with me. He worked quickly, his focus unwavering, but Maya could sense the urgency in his movements. Don't worry, he said, though his voice was laced with concern. You're going to be all right. Just hold on. Lily couldn't stop crying, but she managed to nod as she moved aside, letting the officer do his work. Her hands were still covered in her mother's blood, but she didn't care. She only cared about one thing, her mother's survival. Officer Daniels spoke into his radio, requesting backup and an ambulance. We've got a gunshot wound here, he said, his voice steady, though his mind was already racing. We need medical attention, now. Within minutes, another officer arrived, followed by 2 paramedics carrying a stretcher. As they moved to lift Maya into the ambulance, Officer Daniels turned to Lily. Where did this happen? Do you have any idea who did this? Lily wiped her eyes, trying to gather herself. It was Barbara Whitaker. She's the one who shot her. She thought my mom was trespassing. But we didn't even go on her property. She's crazy. Officer Daniels nodded, taking mental notes. We'll take care of that. Just stay strong, all right? We're going to get her the help she needs. The paramedics began their work, and Maya was swiftly placed in the ambulance. Lily stood by the open doors, her mind still swirling in disbelief, her hands trembling from the trauma. I'll take you to the hospital, Officer Daniels said, his voice calm but serious. We'll make sure everything's handled. As the ambulance doors closed and the sirens wailed again, the world seemed to slow down. But there was a glimmer of hope now. Maya was going to survive. And Lily would finally get the peace of mind she so desperately needed. For now, it was enough to know they were not alone anymore. The storm had passed, but the aftermath was just beginning. The sterile white lights of the hospital room seemed to accentuate the gravity of the situation. Maya lay in a bed, hooked up to and for, her left shoulder bandaged but still throbbing with pain. She was awake now, but the haze of exhaustion and the aftermath of the bullet wound weighed heavily on her. The only sound in the room was the soft beeping of the heart monitor, steady but distant in her ears. Across from her, Officer Mark Daniels sat in a chair, a notepad and pen in hand. He had come directly from the scene of the shooting, and his presence was calm but stern. Maya could sense the professionalism in him, but his eyes held an understanding. He knew that there was more to this story than just the simple act of a woman shooting another over a photo. Maya, I need to ask you a few questions, Officer Daniels said, his voice firm but not unkind. Maya nodded, though her body felt sluggish, tired from the trauma. Go ahead, she said, her voice hoarse. She wanted to know what was happening, what had been done to bring justice for her daughter. I need to know exactly what happened. From the beginning. How did you end up in her yard? Maya closed her eyes, recalling the events of that afternoon, the quiet walk with Lily, the beauty of the flowers, the innocent desire to capture a moment. We were just walking, taking some pictures, she said softly. Lily saw the garden, and she wanted to get a shot of it. We didn't even go onto her property, officer. She was standing by the sidewalk. Officer Daniels jotted something down in his notebook, his brow furrowed. But Ms. Whitaker, Barbara, says otherwise. She claims that Lily was trespassing on her land and that she was a threat. Maya swallowed hard, trying to hold back the bitterness that threatened to overwhelm her. That's a lie. We were just taking pictures from the street. We never stepped onto her property. But when she came out and saw Lily with her camera, she went crazy. The officer nodded, his face grim. I understand. And we'll follow up on the details, but the situation is more complicated than it first appears. The shooting, self-defense or not, is still under investigation. Maya clenched her fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. She shot my daughter, officer. For no reason. For taking a picture. How is that even possible? Officer Daniels set down his pen and leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. It's not going to be easy, Maya. But we're going to find out the truth. The next few hours felt like a blur for Maya. While she recovered from her injury, Officer Daniels and the other detectives worked tirelessly to piece together the truth of what had happened that afternoon. They took statements from witnesses, including Evelyn Carter, the neighbor who had heard the gunshot and called 911. They even spoke to others in the neighborhood, though most were reluctant to get involved. Back in her hospital room, Maya lay in silence, her mind racing as she thought about the consequences of Barbara's actions. The question that loomed over her was simple: would Barbara be held accountable for what she had done? Could a claim of intrusion justify a gunshot wound? Maya didn't think so. She knew the law well enough to know that self-defense wasn't just about protecting one's property, it was about an imminent threat, something Barbara clearly hadn't experienced. Maya wasn't the only one who was concerned. The district attorney had been notified, and the legal team was reviewing the evidence. There were no clear signs of trespassing. The photos Lily had taken showed a beautiful, public garden, not some hidden, forbidden space. The legal complexities were becoming clear. Was it a crime of passion? Was Barbara really just trying to defend herself, or had she overreacted out of some misplaced sense of control? Maya's mind flashed back to the moment Barbara pulled the gun. She could still hear her words, the rage in her voice. "I'll make you pay for this." To Maya, it felt like a complete overreaction, a disproportionate response to a simple misunderstanding. But how would the court see it? Officer Daniels had explained that the law would take its course. If Barbara was charged with assault, the sentence could range from prison time to probation. If the charges were more severe, if intent to harm was proven, it could mean more. Maya tried to focus on the facts, the certainty that justice would prevail, but it was hard to ignore the gnawing feeling of helplessness inside her. "I'll make sure the investigation stays on track," Daniels had said, his voice steady. But Maya knew the true challenge would come in the courtroom, where the truth would need to be proven beyond the shadow of a doubt. As Maya sat alone in her hospital room, the weight of the situation still pressing on her chest, her thoughts turned to her daughter. Lily had been through so much, first the shock of the shooting, then the trauma of seeing her mother wounded, and now, the uncertainty of what would happen next. Lily had been sedated for the night, the doctors needing to manage her anxiety and exhaustion, but Maya knew the emotional scars were just as deep. Maya could already see the signs of trauma in her daughter, the way she clung to her, the fearful glances she cast at every person who entered the room, even the doctors. Maya's heart ached as she thought of Lily. She was just a teenager, caught in a situation that no child should ever have to face. It wasn't just the physical wound that needed attention, it was the emotional toll that would take much longer to heal. Lily woke up early the next morning, her eyes red from crying. She looked at Maya, her expression heavy with worry. "Mom, are you okay?" Maya smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair away from Lily's forehead. "I'm okay, sweetheart. It'll take time, but we'll get through this together." Lily nodded, though the doubt in her eyes didn't leave. She reached out for her mother's hand, her fingers trembling. "I'm so sorry, Mom. This is all my fault. I shouldn't have taken that picture." Maya squeezed Lily's hand gently. "No, sweetie, this is not your fault. None of this is. You did nothing wrong." The guilt in Lily's eyes was palpable, but Maya could see something else, too, something more powerful. It was the resilience of a young girl who had been through something awful, but who was still willing to fight for what was right. Maya had to believe that. They would both get through this. Together. The days following the shooting felt like an endless blur. Maya had barely had time to catch her breath before the legal proceedings began. She was still recovering physically from her gunshot wound, but now, she had to brace herself for the emotional battle ahead. The hospital had released her, but the real fight had only just begun. Her lawyer, Claire Thomas, was a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who had experience in criminal defense and civil cases. She had been in contact with Maya almost daily, explaining the process and guiding her through the legal labyrinth. "This isn't going to be quick, Maya," Claire had told her gently. "But we will make sure Barbara Whitaker is held accountable for what she did." Maya sat at the small wooden desk in her living room, papers spread out in front of her. She felt the weight of the case hanging over her, the intensity of the upcoming court battle settling in her chest. Claire had already helped her prepare her statement, outlining the events leading up to the shooting. It was the only part of the case Maya felt confident about. The photos from Lily's camera, showing her standing on the sidewalk and clearly not crossing into Barbara's yard, would back their side of the story. The defense would have a harder time arguing that Lily's actions were a legitimate threat to Barbara's safety. But there were still questions. Was this a case of self-defense, or was it a reckless and extreme overreaction? Was there enough evidence to prove that Barbara was guilty of a crime more severe than assault? "Maya, are you ready?" Claire's voice pulled her from her thoughts. The trial was set to begin in just a few days. Maya took a deep breath and stood up, knowing this wasn't just about the law, it was about justice. Not just for herself, but for Lily, too. "I'm ready," Maya said, her voice steady, though her heart pounded. "We have to make sure she doesn't get away with this." The courtroom was stuffy and cold, a stark contrast to the heat of the desert where the shooting had occurred. Maya sat in the witness stand, her hands folded tightly in her lap as her mind raced. She could feel every eye on her, every attorney, every juror, and Barbara, sitting just a few feet away with her own lawyer, looking composed, but her eyes were still sharp, filled with disdain. Maya's heart thudded in her chest as she waited for her turn to speak. Claire, standing beside her, gave her an encouraging nod, and Maya knew she had to stay focused. Her words would determine how the jury saw the events of that day, how they would ultimately judge Barbara Whitaker. First, Claire called her to the stand. She asked Maya to recount the events leading up to the shooting. Maya spoke clearly, the events still fresh in her mind. "We were walking, and Lily was just taking a picture of the garden. We didn't go into her yard. We were on the sidewalk. And then she came out, yelling at us, accusing Lily of trespassing." Maya paused, swallowing hard. "I tried to calm her down, but she was furious. She said it was intrusion and that she had the right to defend her property. Then, she pulled out a gun." She could hear her own voice tremble, but she steadied herself. The memory of the pain from the bullet wound flared up in her side, but she pushed it away. She had to stay strong. The defense attorney immediately objected, trying to undermine Maya's account. "Your Honor, my client was acting in self-defense. The defendant had every right to protect her property from an intruder." But Claire was quick to counter. "Self-defense doesn't justify the use of deadly force in a situation like this. Mrs. Whitaker was not in immediate danger, and Lily was never a threat. The photos taken by Lily are clear evidence that she never set foot on the defendant's property." Next, Evelyn Carter took the stand. The elderly woman had witnessed the shooting from her own porch and had been the one to call 911. Evelyn's testimony was critical. She confirmed that Lily was standing on the sidewalk, not on Barbara's property, and that the shooting had been completely unprovoked. As Evelyn spoke, Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. This was the truth, and the truth was starting to come through in the courtroom. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation as the jury deliberated. Maya sat at the table, her fingers tapping anxiously against the wooden surface. The trial had gone on for weeks, each day dragging on with the weight of uncertainty hanging over them. Would the jury see through Barbara's defense? Would they understand the truth of the situation, that Barbara's actions had been nothing more than a violent overreaction? Maya's mind was reeling with a million questions. The photos. Evelyn's testimony. Her own words. Everything they had fought for seemed to rest on the shoulders of 12 strangers, deciding the fate of the woman who had shot her daughter. The door to the courtroom opened, and the jury filed in. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, looked down at them, waiting for the verdict. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked, her voice steady and commanding. "Yes, Your Honor," the foreman replied, standing up and holding the piece of paper with the verdict. The room fell silent as he read the words aloud. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Barbara Whitaker, guilty of aggravated assault." Maya's breath caught in her throat. The words sank in slowly, like a heavy weight lifting off her chest. Barbara had been found guilty. The room erupted in whispers as Maya's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't over yet. The battle had taken its toll, but this was a victory, a small one, but a victory nonetheless. Barbara would be held accountable for what she had done. As Maya stood, her legs shaky, Claire smiled at her, giving her a supportive nod. Maya's eyes met Lily's across the room. Her daughter was safe. The truth had been heard. And for the first time since the shooting, Maya allowed herself to breathe. The battle had been long, but justice had been served. The cold, sterile air of the courtroom was oppressive as Maya took her seat. She felt the weight of the room pressing down on her shoulders, the judgment in the eyes of the jurors, the stern gaze of the judge, and the tension that hung thick in the atmosphere. The courtroom was packed, family, friends, and reporters from local news outlets all watching intently as the trial against Barbara Whitaker, the woman who had shot Maya's daughter, began in earnest. The opening arguments were about to start. Maya's lawyer, Claire Thomas, stood with quiet confidence, her sharp eyes scanning the room as she prepared to make her opening statement. Maya's hands trembled slightly in her lap, but she forced herself to sit still. She couldn't afford to show her nerves now. Not when so much was at stake. "The evidence we present in this case will make it abundantly clear," Claire's voice rang out, calm but firm. This was not a case of self-defense. This was a reckless, unjustifiable shooting. Barbara Whitaker overreacted, and in doing so, she put an innocent life at risk. Maya glanced toward the defense table. There, sitting as if she were completely unbothered by the gravity of the situation, was Barbara. The woman's expression was cold and unremorseful, her face devoid of any visible emotion. She sat with her arms crossed, her eyes locked on the prosecution team as though she were in complete control. Lily Thompson, a 17-year-old girl, was simply taking a photograph of a beautiful garden in a public space. She was not trespassing. She was not causing harm. And yet, she was shot. The defense will try to justify the actions of the defendant by claiming that she was protecting her property, but there is no evidence to support that claim. This was an act of unnecessary violence, and it needs to be held accountable, Claire continued, her words cutting through the tension like a knife. Maya's throat tightened as she listened to Claire's words. The truth was out there now. Everyone in the room would soon know what had happened that day, and no amount of defense would change the facts. The judge nodded in acknowledgement, signaling the start of the defense's argument. The courtroom fell silent in anticipation. Barbara Whitaker's lawyer, a tall, stoic man named Robert Harrington, stood to deliver his opening statement. Maya's stomach churned as he adjusted his glasses, his calm demeanor in stark contrast to the anger and chaos that had unfolded in their lives just weeks before. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Robert began, his voice smooth and deliberate. "What you are about to hear is not a simple case of trespassing or misunderstanding. This is a case of self-defense. My client, Mrs. Whitaker, had every right to protect her home and her property." Maya's breath caught in her throat as she listened. She had been dreading this moment, the moment when Barbara would try to justify her actions, to make herself appear as the victim. She had seen it before. The manipulative tone. The twisting of the facts. But hearing it out loud, in front of everyone, made it even harder to bear. "Barbara Whitaker has lived on this property for over 20 years, Robert continued, and she has always been vigilant about her boundaries. When she saw an unknown person standing near her garden, a place she values deeply, she felt threatened. Now, the prosecution will try to paint her as a violent, unreasonable person. But the truth is, she did what any responsible homeowner would do, she acted to protect what was hers." Maya could feel the blood rising in her face. The defense was painting Barbara as a victim, claiming that the gunshot was an act of necessity, not aggression. The thought made Maya's blood boil. Barbara, sitting across the room, didn't flinch as her lawyer spoke. She was calm, composed, almost eerily so. She looked so different from the woman who had pulled a gun on them, her rage boiling over at the mere sight of a camera aimed at her garden. "My client feared for her safety," Robert continued, "and when she saw Ms. Thompson, a young girl, photographing her property, she acted on instinct. There was no malicious intent in her actions, just a desire to protect herself from what she believed was a trespasser." Maya couldn't keep her composure any longer. Her fists clenched tightly at her sides. This was not the truth. This was a lie. Lily had been standing on a public sidewalk. There was no reason to shoot her. There was no reason to even pull the gun. The defense rested, but the damage had been done. The seed of doubt had been planted in the jurors' minds. Maya knew that the next few days would be critical. The truth needed to come out, and she would make sure that it did. No matter how hard Barbara tried to twist the facts. Maya's heart raced as she stood in the witness box. The weight of the courtroom felt unbearable as the eyes of the jury, the judge, and everyone in the room were on her. This was her moment to speak, to make sure that the truth about what happened that day was known. She took a deep breath and began her testimony, her voice strong but steady. On the day of the shooting, my daughter, Lily, and I were just walking in the neighborhood. We were admiring the gardens and taking some pictures of the flowers. Lily, who's passionate about photography, noticed the beautiful garden outside Mrs. Whitaker's house. We were on the sidewalk, never once stepping onto her property. Maya's mind flashed back to that moment, the sight of Barbara storming out of her house, yelling at them from the yard. Her words were still fresh in Maya's memory. I told her that we meant no harm, that we were just passing by. I didn't realize how dangerous she was, how out of control she had become. But then, she pulled out a gun. I tried to stop her, tried to get Lily behind me. But Barbara raised the gun. I saw the fear in my daughter's eyes before the shot went off. I remember the sound, the deafening crack of the gun. I felt the pain in my shoulder and knew immediately that my daughter was in danger. Maya wiped a tear from her eye, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Barbara didn't need to shoot her. She didn't need to shoot anyone. But she did, and now my daughter is traumatized. And I'm here because I need justice. We need justice for what she did. Her words hung in the air, and Maya saw the jurors' eyes soften. She wasn't sure if it was enough, but she knew it was the truth. The truth that couldn't be denied. As she stepped down from the witness box, Maya felt a quiet sense of relief. The truth had been spoken. The truth was now in the hands of the jury. Now, all they could do was wait for the outcome. The hospital room felt eerily quiet, the only sound the soft beeping of the heart monitor. Maya Thompson lay motionless in the sterile bed, her body exhausted, but her mind was alive, replaying the events of that fateful day like a film she couldn't stop watching. She could still feel the pain, the sharp, searing heat of the bullet tearing into her shoulder. But the physical agony had faded into the background of her mind. What was far worse, what kept her awake in the dark, was the gnawing sense of helplessness. The terror she had seen in her daughter's eyes, the horror of knowing she couldn't protect Lily from the danger that had been so close. Maya's hand instinctively rested on the bandages wrapped around her wound, her fingers pressing against the gauze. The wound was still fresh, too fresh for her to move freely. She had been shot by a woman who should have never had the right to pull a gun, let alone point it at her daughter. But Barbara Whitaker had done just that. And now, Maya and Lily were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Her mind flickered to Lily, still recovering from the shock. Her daughter had taken the brunt of the emotional trauma. And even though the physical injuries were minor compared to what Maya had endured, the psychological scars were deep. Maya could see it in Lily's eyes, the way she avoided certain situations, the way she flinched at loud noises or fast movements. It was all too much, and Maya felt the weight of the guilt pressing down on her chest. The door opened softly, and Claire Thomas, her lawyer, entered the room. Her face was somber, but there was a resolve in her eyes that Maya appreciated. She knew that this case, this legal battle, was far from over. Maya was still recovering, both physically and mentally, but the fight for justice wasn't something she could afford to step away from. "We need to talk, Maya," Claire said gently, sitting down beside the bed. "I've spoken to the prosecution. They've reviewed everything, and there's one thing I need to make clear: we're not just fighting for compensation here. We're fighting to ensure that Barbara Whitaker never has the chance to harm anyone again." Maya's heart clenched. I know. But I'm scared, Claire. What if the jury doesn't believe us? What if she gets away with this? Claire placed a reassuring hand on Maya's arm. We have the truth on our side, Maya. We just need to make sure they hear it loud and clear. And we will. Together. Maya took a deep breath, her resolve strengthening. For her daughter. For herself. For the justice they both deserved. The courtroom was a battleground. Maya felt it in the pit of her stomach, the tension hanging thick in the air as the final arguments began. Her attorney, Claire, was calm, collected, her voice unwavering as she presented their case. The evidence was stacked in their favor, the photos from Lily's camera, the witness testimony from Evelyn Carter, and the undeniable fact that Barbara Whitaker had shot an innocent girl for no reason other than her own delusions of protecting what she thought was hers. Barbara sat across the room, her expression cold, her eyes still carrying that unyielding arrogance. She looked like a woman who had nothing to lose, someone who believed she was above the law. Maya could see her sitting there, her face impassive, but Maya knew better. This woman was dangerous. And the only way to stop her was to make sure she faced the consequences of her actions. The defense lawyer, Robert Harrington, stood up next, his calm demeanor at odds with the storm raging inside Maya. His voice dripped with condescension as he began to address the jury. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Robert began, his voice smooth and practiced, this is not a case of malice. This is not a case of a woman trying to hurt someone. This is a case of self-defense. My client, Barbara Whitaker, was merely protecting her property from what she perceived as a trespasser. A young girl, photographing her private garden, crossing boundaries she should never have crossed. Maya's breath caught in her throat. The audacity of his words, the lie that Barbara had somehow been the victim, was sickening. But she knew that the jury needed to hear the truth. They needed to know that Barbara had taken the extreme, irreversible step of pulling a weapon on an innocent child. Robert continued, the defense is simple, Mrs. Whitaker felt threatened. She acted to protect what was rightfully hers. There was no intent to harm. Just a woman, in a moment of panic, doing what she thought she had to do. Maya could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the injustice of it all rising like a tidal wave. But then, as Robert finished his statement, Claire stood up with quiet authority, ready for their final rebuttal. Your Honor, Claire said, her voice cutting through the room, the defendant's actions were not the result of panic. They were the result of a warped sense of entitlement, an obsession with protecting something that didn't need protection. Lily Thompson, an innocent 17-year-old girl, was simply taking a photograph from the sidewalk, public property. She posed no threat. And yet, she was shot. The prosecution will show you that Barbara Whitaker's actions were reckless, violent, and unjustifiable. This is not self-defense. This is assault. And it must be punished. Claire turned to the jury, her eyes steady and unwavering. We ask that you consider the facts. We ask that you hold Mrs. Whitaker accountable for her actions, so that no one else ever has to endure what these two women have. Maya could feel a swell of pride for Claire, for everything she had done to bring the truth into the light. It was one thing to tell the story of what happened, but it was another to make sure that the truth prevailed, no matter the cost. The jury deliberated for what seemed like hours. Maya sat in the courtroom, her body tense, her heart racing with anticipation. She couldn't focus on anything except the uncertainty of the outcome. Every minute felt like a lifetime, each second stretching out endlessly. Finally, the door to the jury room opened, and the foreman stepped forward, a solemn expression on his face. The room fell silent. Has the jury reached a verdict? The judge asked, her voice calm but firm. Yes, Your Honor, the foreman replied. He unfolded the paper and cleared his throat before reading the verdict aloud. We, the jury, find the defendant, Barbara Whitaker, guilty of aggravated assault with a firearm. Maya's breath caught in her chest as the words sank in. A wave of relief washed over her, but it was quickly followed by an overwhelming sense of disbelief. This was really happening. Barbara Whitaker, the woman who had shot her daughter for no reason, was finally being held accountable for her actions. Maya looked over at Lily, who sat beside her, her face pale but full of hope. The tears welled up in Maya's eyes as she squeezed her daughter's hand. They had won. The truth had prevailed, and Barbara Whitaker would finally face the consequences of her violence. The judge spoke again, this time with a finality that seemed to echo through the room. "Mrs. Whitaker, you will be remanded for sentencing. The court will determine the length of your sentence." Barbara's face twisted in anger, but it was too late for her to do anything about it. Maya watched as the officers moved to arrest her, the weight of justice finally falling upon the woman who had caused so much harm. As the courtroom began to empty, Maya stood, her legs weak beneath her, but her heart full of something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. She had fought for her daughter. They had both fought for this moment, and it was finally here. Lily turned to Maya, her face soft with relief. "We did it, Mom," she whispered. Maya smiled, her heart full of love for her daughter. "Yes, we did. We made it through. And we'll be okay. Together." As they left the courtroom, the weight of the past few weeks slowly began to lift. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Maya felt a glimmer of hope for what was to come. The darkness had passed, and the light of justice had finally shone through. The air felt lighter now, as if a heavy burden had been lifted, but the calm was still fragile. Maya sat by the window of their small apartment, gazing out at the quiet street below. It had been a week since the trial, since Barbara Whitaker had been convicted of aggravated assault. The world felt different now, but Maya couldn't shake the memory of the chaos, of the terror that had consumed her and Lily's life. Still, for the first time in weeks, the weight on her chest seemed to lift just slightly. Lily had been remarkably quiet in the days since the trial, but Maya knew her daughter was struggling with the emotions beneath the surface. The trauma of the shooting, the courtroom battle, and the constant reminders of that day had left both of them wounded in ways they hadn't fully processed yet. But at least, for now, there was peace, a semblance of normalcy. Maya knew they couldn't pretend everything was okay. They had both been through hell. But this moment, this quiet in their lives, was something they needed to hold on to. The sound of Lily's voice broke her thoughts. "Mom?" Maya turned toward the soft sound of her daughter's voice. Lily was standing in the doorway, her eyes puffy from a night of restless sleep, but there was a spark in her gaze now, something that hadn't been there before. Maya smiled gently, beckoning her daughter to come sit beside her. "Come here, sweetheart," Maya said, patting the space next to her. Lily hesitated for a moment, then walked over and sank down beside her mother. She rested her head on Maya's shoulder, and for a long while, neither of them spoke. There was nothing more to say. They had made it through the storm. Together. Maya gently stroked her daughter's hair, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, and yet, for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. The days after the trial were quiet, but the silence in the apartment was heavy, filled with the kind of unspoken tension that only trauma could create. Maya sat in her small living room, staring blankly at the television that played in front of her, but she wasn't really watching. She couldn't seem to focus on anything for long. Her mind kept drifting back to the shooting, the gunshot, the pain, the terror in Lily's eyes. Lily had been so brave, so strong through it all, but Maya could see the cracks in her daughter's facade. There was a fear in her eyes, a distant look that hadn't been there before. Maya knew that Lily was struggling in ways she hadn't yet fully acknowledged. The therapy sessions they had started attending helped, but they couldn't erase the weight of the trauma. Maya had seen the way Lily flinched at loud noises, the way she held her breath when strangers approached too quickly. She saw the subtle changes in her daughter, the tightness in her shoulders, the hesitation in her voice when talking about what had happened. It broke Maya's heart, because she knew that while the trial had been a victory, it hadn't healed the invisible wounds. Lily walked into the room, her eyes tired but determined. She sat down beside Maya and took her hand. "I'm okay, Mom," she said quietly, though there was a tremor in her voice. "I'm just not okay, you know." Maya squeezed her daughter's hand, fighting the tears that threatened to rise. "I know, sweetie. I know. But we'll get through this. Together." Lily nodded but didn't say anything else. There were no quick fixes for trauma, no simple solutions to erase the pain. But Maya would be there for her daughter every step of the way. They would heal, piece by piece. The road would be long, but they were no longer alone. The months that followed the trial were a mix of healing and lingering uncertainty. Maya returned to work part-time, though the familiar office felt strange after everything that had happened. It was hard to settle into a routine, but she knew she had to try. For herself. For Lily. The guilt of what had happened to her daughter, how she hadn't been able to protect her, still gnawed at her, but she kept moving forward. It was all she could do. Lily, too, had started to regain a semblance of normality. She returned to school, though it took a while before she was able to go back with any real confidence. She still had her moments, times when she would suddenly freeze, when the sound of a door slamming or a loud voice would send her into a panic. But with every passing day, Maya could see Lily's strength return, bit by bit. The smile that had once been a distant memory was now creeping back, and Maya cherished each moment. One evening, after dinner, the two of them sat on the couch, wrapped in blankets, watching a movie. For the first time since the shooting, Maya felt the weight of the world lift, if only for a moment. The tension had ebbed. The unspoken fear was no longer at the forefront of her mind. Instead, there was a quiet peace in the room. Lily turned to Maya, her expression softer than it had been in months. "You know, Mom," she began, her voice hesitant but warm, "I think I'm starting to believe that things might be okay. Not all the way, but, some days, I feel like we're going to make it." Maya smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "I believe that too, sweetheart." The two of them sat there, the sound of the movie filling the quiet room, but it was the silence between them that spoke the loudest. The silence was no longer uncomfortable. It was filled with understanding, with the quiet strength that both of them had come to realize they possessed. Maya turned to Lily, her hand resting gently on her daughter's. "We've been through a lot, haven't we? But we've got each other. And as long as we do, we'll be okay." Lily smiled, the weight of everything they had survived lingering in the air, but no longer defining them. "Yeah, we will." And for the first time in months, Maya truly believed it. They had been through the darkest of times, but now, in the quiet, they could finally start to heal. Together.